You know, there's something fascinating that happens when you walk into a room with genuine confidence. Not arrogance, not performance, but that quiet, settled kind of energy, the kind that says, I know who I am, and I don't need your approval to feel that way. And what happens next is something most people never talk about. Because instead of being celebrated, instead of being welcomed, sometimes you become a target. People start picking at you. They misread your silence as judgment. They interpret your confidence as a threat. They project emotions onto you that have absolutely nothing to do with you and everything to do with what's happening inside of them. Today, we're going to go deep on this. We're going to talk about why your strong presence triggers insecure people, why they project their inner fears onto you, and most importantly, what that says about them, not about you. So settle in, because this one is going to hit differently. What is projection? Let's start at the foundation. What is psychological projection? The concept was first formally described by Sigmund Freud, who observed that human beings have a natural defense mechanism when we have thoughts, feelings, or traits that feel too painful or too shameful to acknowledge within ourselves. We unconsciously push them outward. We assign them to other people. We see in others what we cannot bear to see in ourselves. Think about that for a moment. The person who constantly accuses others of lying is often the one who struggles most with honesty. The person who assumes everyone is out to get them is often the one carrying the most hostility inside. The person who tells you that you think you're better than everyone else is often the one who secretly wishes they felt better about themselves. Projection is a mirror trick. It's the mind's way of saying, I can't look at this in me, so I'll point at it in you. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Projection doesn't happen randomly. It's not triggered by just anyone. It tends to be triggered most powerfully by people who embody the very thing the insecure person is afraid they lack. And that right there is why you become a target. Your strength, your groundedness, your sense of self, it acts like a flashlight shining directly into the dark corners of someone else's unresolved wounds. And instead of turning toward their own healing, they turn toward attacking the source of the light. They attack you. The anatomy of a strong presence. Now let's talk about what a strong presence actually is, because I want to be precise here. A strong presence is not about being loud. It's not about dominating conversations. It's not about making sure everyone in the room knows you're important. In fact, those behaviors, the loudness, the domination, the constant self-promotion, those are often the behaviors of someone who is deeply insecure and overcompensating. A genuinely strong presence is something far quieter and far more powerful. It's the person who doesn't chase approval, who can sit in silence without feeling anxious, who can be misunderstood without immediately rushing to explain themselves, who can disagree without becoming defensive, who can be criticized without being shattered, who knows their own value without needing someone else to announce it. That kind of person, and maybe that person is you, carries an energy that is immediately felt when they enter a space. It's a settled, unshakable quality, and it communicates something to everyone around them, whether they realize it or not. To a secure person, that energy is magnetic. It's inspiring. It feels safe to be around someone who is genuinely themselves because it gives you permission to be genuinely yourself too. But to an insecure person, that same energy is deeply unsettling. And here's why. When you are at war with yourself, when you don't truly believe in your own worth, when you're constantly performing a version of yourself for other people's acceptance, being around someone who has found peace within themselves is like holding up a mirror you don't want to look into. Your stillness exposes their restlessness. Your confidence exposes their self-doubt. Your authenticity exposes their performance. And that exposure feels threatening. It feels uncomfortable. And uncomfortable people, without self-awareness, almost always look for someone to blame for that discomfort. They blame you. The specific fears that get projected. Let's get specific now. What are the fears that insecure people most commonly project onto someone with a strong presence? The first and most common is the fear of inadequacy. Deep down, many insecure people live with a voice that tells them they are not enough, not smart enough, not successful enough, not attractive enough, not worthy enough. And when they encounter someone who moves through the world without that voice dictating their every action, something inside them snaps. They start to interpret your confidence as you silently judging them. They assume you think you're better than them. They say things like, oh, they think they're so special, or who do they think they are? But ask yourself, did you say you were special? Did you announce that you thought you were better? You simply existed in your fullness. The judgment they perceive is coming entirely from inside themselves. They are projecting their own inner critic onto you. The second fear is the fear of authenticity. Many insecure people have spent years, sometimes their entire lives, wearing masks, being who others wanted them to be, suppressing their real opinions, desires, emotions, in order to be accepted. And when they encounter someone who lives authentically, who says what they think, who doesn't change their personality depending on the room, who doesn't shrink to make others comfortable, it creates enormous discomfort, because your authenticity quietly asks them a question they're not ready to answer. Why can't I be that free? And rather than sitting with that question and doing the inner work it requires, they externalize it. They call you arrogant. They call you too much. They say you're full of yourself. None of that is about you. All of it is about the cage they've built around themselves and their resentment that you're not in one too. The third fear is the fear of abandonment and rejection. Some insecure people, especially those with attachment wounds from childhood, are terrified of being left, ignored, or seen as unimportant. And when you move through the world with self-sufficiency, when you don't need constant reassurance, when you're okay with being alone, when you don't beg for attention, it activates that wound in them like almost nothing else can. Your independence feels like a threat. Your self-reliance feels like rejection. They start to project that you don't care, that you're cold, that you're dismissive, when really what's happening is that you simply don't need what they need. And that gap between your needs and theirs terrifies them. The fourth fear is the fear of being exposed. Some people are carrying secrets, not just facts, but emotional secrets. The secret that they feel like a fraud. The secret that their life isn't what it looks like on the outside. The secret that they're terrified people will find out they're not as capable or as together as they present. And when someone with a strong, authentic presence walks in, someone who is genuinely integrated, who has done the work, who isn't hiding it, makes that fragile facade feel even more precarious. Your wholeness threatens their performance, and so they attack first. They try to poke holes in you, find flaws in you, tear you down, not because you deserve it, but because if you fall too, their own performance feels safer. How projection shows up in behavior. Understanding projection conceptually is one thing, but you also need to be able to recognize it in real life, in real interactions. Because projection doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. Sometimes it's wearing the costume of something that almost looks reasonable. Here are the ways projection from insecure people tends to show up in your life. Unprovoked criticism. You haven't done anything to this person. You've barely interacted, and yet they seem to have a strong, almost passionate opinion about your flaws. They find things to nitpick that nobody else notices or cares about. This unprovoked quality is a hallmark of projection because they're not actually responding to something you did. They're responding to something you triggered in them. Exaggerated reactions. You say something neutral and they react as if you attacked them. You set a boundary and they behave as though you've declared war. The emotional volume of their response is completely disproportionate to what actually happened. That disproportionality is the projection. Your action was small, but it landed on a very old, very tender wound inside them, and the wound's pain is what's responding, not you. Constant comparison. Insecure people who are projecting their inadequacy tend to turn everything into a competition. They need to know how they rank relative to you. They subtly or not so subtly bring up their achievements around you. They get quiet and strange when you succeed. They can't celebrate you without somehow centering themselves, because in their mind your success is a direct commentary on their value. Rumors and reputation attacks. When projection gets more toxic, it sometimes shows up as someone actively trying to damage how others see you. They tell stories about you that aren't true or that twist the truth beyond recognition. They work to turn your allies against you. And this is particularly cruel because you're often not even fully aware of it while it's happening. But understand, someone who is secure in themselves has absolutely no motive to tear you apart in the eyes of others. That behavior comes from fear. Specifically, the fear that who you are diminishes who they are. Constant unsolicited advice. This is a more passive-aggressive form. They're always telling you what you should do differently, how you should behave, what adjustments you need to make, framed as concern but delivered with an edge. What this actually communicates is, your way of being makes me uncomfortable. Please be smaller. Please be more like me, or at least more confused than me, so that I can feel better about where I am. Why your strength triggers their shadow. Now I want to go a layer deeper, because there's a psychological concept here that explains everything we've been talking about, and I think it deserves its own space. It's the concept of the shadow, introduced by Carl Jung. Jung believed that every human being has what he called a shadow, the parts of ourselves that we've repressed, denied, hidden away. Not just the dark parts, but any part of us that we decided wasn't acceptable. Our anger, our ambition, our sensitivity, our neediness, our desire for greatness. Whatever our early environment told us wasn't safe to express, that goes into the shadow. And here's the crucial piece. The shadow doesn't disappear just because you push it down. It becomes more powerful. It starts operating from the unconscious, and it projects outward onto the people around you. Now here's what makes this relevant to you. A person with a strong presence often embodies qualities that someone else has locked in their shadow. Maybe you're direct, and they've spent their whole life believing that directness is rude or dangerous. Maybe you're ambitious, and they've spent years telling themselves ambition is arrogant. Maybe you're emotionally expressive, and they were taught that emotions are weakness. When they see those qualities alive and fully expressed in you, healthy, intact, unashamed, it activates the shadow. And shadow activation doesn't feel good. It feels like agitation. It feels like irrational irritation. It feels like a burning need to make you stop being so you. Some psychologists call this shadow projection, specifically the experience of hating in someone else what you've been forced to repress in yourself. And it explains why people can sometimes have a visceral, seemingly irrational negative reaction to someone who has done absolutely nothing wrong. The bad news for them is that the answer to shadow projection is not found in attacking the other person. The answer is found only in turning inward, reclaiming those repressed parts of themselves, and integrating them. In other words, the answer is growth, and growth is terrifying to someone who has been running from themselves for years. The bad news for you is that they might keep projecting onto you until they do that work. But the good news, and this is important, is that their projection is not your responsibility to absorb. You don't have to hold it. You don't have to fix it. And you certainly don't have to shrink yourself to make it stop. What not to do when someone projects onto you. This brings us to a really critical section. Because when someone projects their fears onto you, especially repeatedly, there are instinctive responses that feel natural but actually make things worse. The first mistake is over-explaining yourself. When someone misreads your confidence as arrogance, the temptation is to immediately clarify, to defend, to prove that you're not what they're saying you are. But here's the problem with over-explaining. It signals that their interpretation of you has power over you. It suggests that their judgment gets to define your reality. And insecure people, especially those who are projecting, will interpret your defensiveness as confirmation that they hit a nerve. The more you explain, the more they double down. The second mistake is shrinking. Maybe if I'm less confident, they'll feel more comfortable. Maybe if I talk less, take up less space, achieve less visibly, they'll stop coming at me. This is perhaps the most damaging response because it requires you to betray yourself in order to manage someone else's emotional wounds. And it never works. Because a person who is insecure is not actually made more secure by your smallness. Your smallness might temporarily reduce the triggering, but it doesn't resolve the underlying wound. And meanwhile, you've lost a piece of yourself. The third mistake is internalizing their projection. This is the most insidious one. When someone tells you directly or indirectly that your confidence is a problem, that your strength is off-putting, that your success is arrogance, there's a part of us that wonders, is it true? Am I too much? Should I be more like them? This is exactly where projection becomes most dangerous. Because if you're not careful, you will take on a story about yourself that was never yours. You'll start managing yourself through someone else's fear, and that is a profound loss, not just for you, but for everyone who benefits from you being fully, unapologetically yourself. How to respond from a place of power. So if you shouldn't over-explain, shouldn't shrink, and shouldn't internalize, what should you do? The first and most foundational practice is radical clarity about your own identity. The reason projection lands so hard is usually because we're not fully settled in our own sense of self. When we're still uncertain about who we are, external opinions about us have enormous influence. They rush in and fill the vacuum of our self-doubt. So the deepest protection against projection is doing the inner work to become absolutely clear about who you are, what you value, and what you're not. Not in a rigid way. You can still grow and evolve, but in a grounded way, rooted, unshakable. When someone tries to hand you a story about yourself that isn't true, you can simply internally, calmly return it to them. That's not mine. That belongs to you. The second practice is cultivating what I call compassionate detachment. This is not coldness. It's not dismissiveness. It's the ability to observe someone else's behavior, recognize it as their projection, and understand how it affects them. Have genuine compassion for the wound underneath it, and still not absorb it. You can feel sorry for someone's pain without drowning in it. You can witness someone's fear without letting it become your fear. The third practice is being selective about your energy in your company. Not every relationship is worth the toll of constant projection. Some people are in a place in their lives where they are genuinely unsafe for you, not because they're evil, but because their unresolved wounds are so active that being around them consistently costs you your peace, your confidence, or your sense of self. Creating distance from those relationships is not unkind, it is necessary. And it is one of the most powerful things a person with a strong presence can do. The fourth practice is using it as a compass for your own growth. Here's a reframe that I want you to sit with. Every time someone projects onto you, they are accidentally showing you where they believe strength is threatening, where authenticity is dangerous, where wholeness is uncomfortable, and that information can become a compass for you. It can tell you, this is a place where your strength is most needed. Don't retreat here. This is where you must hold ground. Here is what I want you to walk away with today. Your strong presence is not the problem. It is not arrogance. It is not intimidation. It is not an imposition. It is the natural result of someone who has done real, honest inner work, who has faced themselves, claimed themselves, and decided that their authentic self is worth showing up as. That is rare. And like most rare things, it is not universally comfortable. But that discomfort does not belong to you. The people who project their fears onto you are in pain. And somewhere beneath the criticism and the rivalry and the hostility, there is a person who doesn't yet know how to become who they actually want to be. Have compassion for that, not the kind of compassion that requires you to suffer for their sake, but the kind that allows you to see them clearly, without judgment, and still choose yourself. Because here's the truth that wraps everything together. A person who is at peace with themselves does not need to disturb anyone else's peace. The ones who come for you, who project onto you, who try to diminish you, they are giving you the most honest glimpse into their own interior world. They are showing you the war happening inside them. Your job is not to fight that war for them. Your job is to remain who you are, grounded, clear, present, unshaken. The most powerful thing you will ever do in the face of someone else's projection is simply to refuse to become what they need you to be: smaller, dimmer, more confused, and instead to stay exactly, fully, unapologetically yourself. That is not pride, that is integrity.